Go. Welcome everybody to another weekly live stream here on Suns Digest. We got a lot to go over with the Suns, and I'm glad to be here with a special guest from Locked On Suns, one of the co-hosts and a staff writer for Awful Announcing, a credentialed media member for the Phoenix Suns. It is Brendon Kleen. Brendon, thank you so much for joining here today, and how you doing today?
I'm great, man. This is a cool setup you've got. I definitely am intimidated by the constant live. We only go live on special occasions on Locked On Suns, and your audience is different than mine, so hopefully they like me. But we've got a lot to hit, I think, with the Suns, and I think people are feeling a lot better than they were 2 weeks ago. And I think you had originally asked me earlier in the offseason, so I'm kind of glad I waited because now there's some actual good news to hit.
Yeah, I think when I did ask you earlier on, it was like roughly right when it started around the offseason. So now, actually, like you mentioned, with them actually making moves post-draft and actually being involved in some stuff, we can get some good conversations going. And yeah, the fans are here. They're excited to see you in the chat. I see, hell yeah, Brendon is in here in the chat. So that's great to see as well. So once again, thank you guys for being here. Brendon and I are going to dive in and go over everything revolving around the Suns. First, we're going to dive into the draft here. I know that happened just a little bit last week, but obviously the Suns have done some big movement going and getting three guys in Kaman Malawach, Rasheer Fleming, Kobe Brea, but also with the 7-team trade now coming kind of into play, it's now meshing all of those now into this one deal, right? I know a lot of people were speculating some things could get added, but the teams like the Warriors, the Nets, the Timberwolves, the Lakers, all those teams mentioned were teams that helped out the Suns move up in the draft or move back, or even took picks that the Suns traded away. So it does seem like to kind of get rid of those apron restrictions, that's what we're going to kind of see go through with that. So ultimately, as a big question, I'll ask you, what do you think of the trade so far when looking at that return, but also with the pieces that the Suns got in the draft, how would you really rate them?
Oh, that's a good call. I mean, it's funny, like, right? Because you look at it all expanded like that, and it's like, well, hold on. Basically, the entire offseason got folded into one trade. So you're kind of saying, how do you evaluate the whole offseason? I guess the Mark Williams trade being the only thing not in there, and obviously the Nigel Hayes signing and Gillespie coming back and whatnot. But yeah, look, I think it clearly looks better than it did on last Sunday when it came down, right? And I think Suns fans were a little shocked and a little disappointed at the limited return for a dude who's a Hall of Famer and who they gave up the farm to get in Kevin Durant. Obviously, since then it's come out, okay, they seem to have picked the 5 second-round picks potentially over Cam Whitmore. Maybe they didn't even love the idea or try to negotiate too hard for that 2027 first rounder that Houston has of theirs. And I can at least see the vision. Now, I think if they could have gotten that first in 2027, they probably would have. I don't know, how much I'm willing to say that they didn't want that, but with these seconds, they got to work. And when you add in Fleming and Brea to the package that they end up getting with this KD trade, I think you have to feel a lot better about it. So, it's at least, the way I would put it, man, is I think it's at least a step toward the type of team that they want to build. I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether Fleming's going to be great, whether even Malawach is going to be great, as excited as we all are about him, or how Jalen Green's career is going to pan out, or even, can Dillon Brooks shoot it like he did? There's all these questions, but they told us at the beginning of the offseason, we're going to be a physical, hard-nosed, competitive team that embraces defense much more than we did under Mike Budenholzer. And they at least checked a lot of boxes that back up the talk. And so I like that vision and it coming to fruition. And now we just got to see if the individual players actually live up to what they have to live up to.
Yeah, I think that's how you put it there. That's how I've been very vocal about this with this Suns team. Obviously, we got to see on paper it looks good, but the Bradley Beal trade also looked good on paper a couple years ago, and we've already seen the fallout of all of that with all the fans and stuff. So ultimately, with the Suns,
how did it end? You're telling me it didn't end well?
Okay, well it hasn't ended. It hasn't even ended yet, and it's still
exactly.
a crazy nonsense going on with the news coming out today, which we'll get into in a little bit later, but. with the moves that they made, they obviously are, like you said, insightful, going into the right direction from what Jordan Ott, Brian Gregory, Matt Ishbia have kind of laid for you guys at those press conferences on what they want to build for this team. And at least we can kind of see that vision, at least see that direction. Obviously, with Brooks being that high aggressive POA defender, someone that's going to be a solid disruptor fitting around side Devin Booker, maybe someone that can be a little bit vocal as well. I know that he had his quarrels with Mike Budenholzer last year where he said he was being too vocal. Obviously, adding these guys like Dylan Brooks, another loud voice, is only going to, make that echo in the room, which is going to continue, I think, to make Devin Booker a little bit happy, kind of investing in him as well. You mentioned Jalen Green. I think a lot of people aren't really sold on the fit with Jalen Green just because he is another shooting guard. I feel like even with the weird empty stats that he does have, a lot of Suns fans might have been a little bit more relaxed if that was a center, if that was a power forward, just because of that position of need, similar to why a lot of people were interested in that Heat deal for guys like Jovic and Jaquez, which personally, I get that they're wings, they're nice, but I think that Jalen Green's value, not only for now, but also as a tradable asset maybe down the line, is a little bit better than those guys too.
I hope so. I mean, he obviously has the pedigree, right? I think he, the athleticism, just watch the dude play basketball is plenty of a reason why he could end up having a lot of value. He also was a higher pick than a lot of the players that came up over the course of those talks, with any of the teams we're talking about. And the potential's still there. I think, to me, like, honestly, the more that I've seen this roster come into clarity, with Jalen Green, my initial concerns were, fit with Booker, like you said. I think consistency as a three-point shooter, some of those, like, I guess what I would see as maybe easier fixes. But now I don't want to say this new look roster is going to ask more from him, but if it kind of looks like the dude is going to be legitimately handling the ball, whether you want to call him the point guard or not, quite a bit. And so my hopes for Jalen Green have kind of shifted over the 2 weeks or so since the trade happened, where now I'm more concerned, like, okay, can he limit – he needs to cut down on his turnovers. He needs to become a much better passer. Can he even throw a lob in the pick and roll to Malawach or Mark Williams? Like, I just don't really think we've ever seen that element of his game, unless there's some people who have dug into his high school tape in the chat here that I haven't. I have a lot of questions on that because of the role that it seems like he's now going to have to play. So maybe you could say, hey, if he does that, well, that's now like an entirely different type of player that you're talking about, and unlocking skill sets that he's never really been asked to, and that could help him be better for the Suns, or it could help him on another team wherever he might end up. Or, of course, like, being realistic, he doesn't live up to that stuff, and it ends up being too big of an ask, and maybe he's just kind of a sixth man. Like, there's just so many directions that can go. It's obviously the single – I think it's the thing that this offseason hinges on more than anything else, right?
Yeah,
it has to be.
I would agree, and I think that shooting guard room also is the thing that hinges the most on the Suns front office and kind of how they plan out to do stuff. Because not only do they have Jalen Green, not only do they have Devin Booker, who's primarily a shooting guard, and even though he's going to be playing the one it seems like this season is more predominantly a two, we're obviously going to have Grayson Allen potentially still on this roster. Colin Gillespie playing some point guard minutes. You got Jalen Green, like I mentioned. So there's just even Kobe Bryant, if he makes the final roster, which it seems like he will be, he's a 6'6" scorer. So it just seems like there's a lot of people that are going to be kind of in that hole, and we're going to have to see, like you mentioned, if Jalen Green can really live up to as expectations of kind of being able to change his game and kind of work off of it. I know he was the #1 point scorer for the Rockets. It wasn't on great efficiency and stuff like that, but he was the leading scorer for that team last year with 20 points per game, and maybe alongside a guy in Devin Booker playing a little bit more off-ball. If Booker's going to be handling that, he can work as a cutter to the basket and can be that athletic kind of dunker that we've got to be able to see him take over for the Suns, and I think that would be really nice. But that's where I'm kind of looking at for him. I think where you mentioned where he's going to have to, predominantly kind of handle the ball, be a little bit more of a passer. Those are the things that it's going to be tougher for him to kind of work on and get in for his game, which the Suns need because they only have that other point guard in Colin Gillespie on this roster at the moment.
Yeah, I had hope when they got Green that, at that point we were still under the impression that the types of centers they were going to target were going to be a little stretchier, or at least one stretch big, and it looks like they're going to have 0 stretch bigs, and might even keep Nick Richards, who will give them a third not stretch big. And so again, like I don't even necessarily know how to feel about it, but it's just a way different analysis than I had at the beginning, because I liked the potential that even if he was on the ball at times, if there's finally some spacing and he's not trying to score with an offense that has Şengün and Adams both out there, or Şengün and Amen Thompson or whatever, that he really could things could open up for him. But if you're telling me now he's gonna, it's like Ryan Dunn's gonna be on the court a lot with him, and Mark Williams, and again, how good of a shooter is Dylan Brooks gonna be, etc. I don't know if the environment is actually going to be that much better for him than it was last year, and I hate that for him and for how it's going to affect the Suns. And I hope they can figure some things out and whatever Jordan draws up. But yeah, it's obviously, I don't know. I think a lot of us are at least gotten to the point where we're interested to see how the Jalen Green experience plays out, even if we all, I think, still have our reservations.
Yeah, and I definitely would agree with that as well. I think a lot of people still do have those reservations around the fit, but obviously we got to kind of just be a little bit optimistic to see what it could potentially bring out, because like you mentioned, he could be a pretty solid player off as a slasher and cutter. And like you mentioned, I think with the Suns not having that spacing big, it's a little bit harder for him to be that aggressive downhill athlete that he is so dominant with, being on that offensive side. And he's going to, I guess, from covering some Celtic stuff and looking at guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, how they attack, they obviously have those scorers on the wing so they can kick out, have those multiple opportunities to get those three-pointers. That's what was so successful for them at those past 2 seasons. And the Suns, like you mentioned, Dylan Brooks, he was solid last year from three-point shooting. He absolutely erupted versus the Celtics when they came to Boston, but can he do that consistently for the Suns, And I know last year was like his best three-point shooting season of his career or something like that, so can he hold that consistency? You also have the question of Ryan Dunn being out there on the perimeter. Can his jump shot still continue to get better? Obviously they have Beal, Booker, Grayson, guys that can catch off the dribble and can score, but not fully to that roster to where it can really tailor for Jalen Green. But going away from Jalen Green, going a little bit away from some of these guys that we got via in the trade and looking at the draft, we did get some free agency signings so far for the Suns, and Nigel Hayes-Davis was one of them. Colin Gillespie coming back was the other. When you see Colin Gillespie come back, we'll dive into him first, because I think he's a name that I wrote about a little bit that I really liked. What is your main takeaways with Gillespie coming back to the squad, and what role he can present for the Suns?
The role is going to be, I think, the question for sure. But I like him a lot as a player. I mean, people always laugh. Like my co-host on Locked On Suns, Ben, like makes fun of me for falling in love with some of these bit players, and I think we all do it. But when they got him, I was excited. Like you look at this dude when he was in the G League, especially in Denver, because he barely played there last year with the Suns. He was legitimately dominant, like triple doubles, scoring the hell out of the ball. Like he was way too good for the G League, and it was kind of surprising that Denver would let him go. Then he finally gets a chance, and obviously we know how the minutes and the fluctuation with his role went last year, but I've always liked him, and I think you saw it when he did get opportunities last year, what the package is. Like it's this, he almost plays like he's some kind of big combo guard, except that he's only 6 feet tall. I can't even necessarily think of a comp off the top of my head that I would say he's like. I mean, almost like, I guess, a little Lonzo-ish is kind of the mold that I'm thinking of, where he can rebound and grab and go, and he obviously can knock down spot up threes, so he doesn't always have to be on the ball, and he likes to play in pace, hit ahead passes, and just taking advantage of those open, tight windows of the court, seeing stuff before. Like he has a point guard mind in that way, but then when you get to the role, like you kind of mentioned, I think that's where it's going to be interesting, because we didn't even really get to explore different avenues of what he could be last season when he did play, because it was so infrequent and it was such a limited, you're basically going to get some minutes mostly off the ball here and there, and the season's already lost. But, can he be a pick and roll guy, like a heavy volume pick and roll player for this team? Can he, who can he guard? How can he, what's the pathway to him surviving on defense? Can he take pull-up threes, or is it just spot up? what happens when he gets into the paint? Does he have to kind of play like Steve Nash and dribble in circles and survey the defense, or can he score in there, floater or what, turnaround jumper, TJ McConnell style? Like, there's all sorts of, once you get to the pros, adjusting from there. And I think that's what we're going to see this season. But obviously, the dude's really confident that he can make things happen, because he could have taken a multi-year guaranteed deal. I'd imagine the Suns would have given him that, and he took a one-year contract instead, very much betting on himself and looking to cash in again next summer. So he clearly thinks he's going to play a lot and play well this upcoming season, and that would be great for the Suns, and they'd probably just try to negotiate and keep him on whatever his next contract looks like if that does happen.
And I think that would be great for the Suns in a long-term investment too, getting a guy like Colin Gillespie, who not only can play on the ball, like you said, pretty solid as a playmaker, but can fit really well off the ball with Devin Booker. I mentioned this last year a lot, but when the Suns went on that win streak, I believe it was in March, it was when Colin Gillespie was inserted into that lineup, playing alongside Devin Booker, and it was when guys like Grayson Allen and Bradley Beal were hurt. And then when Grayson Allen and Bradley Beal eventually came back from those injuries, Colin lost his minutes, they supplemented him in, and we saw what happened was the off ball, they weren't good fits alongside Booker. And that's where I kind of really stung, where me last year I was very advocating for Gillespie to get that roster spot, even if, it meant that we had to waive Martin or waive Micic, because I felt like the Suns were going to do it anyways. Now, they waived Martin, they traded obviously Micic, but it seemed like one of those was going to be anyway. So why couldn't they sign Gillespie, even if they weren't going to make the playoffs? At least lock him last year, get a solid deal with him, so that they could kind of have him in the facilities, have him working out with the team, and just get that early run. But like you mentioned, I think the key thing with him is what his role is. Personally, I would love the Suns to have him as a secondary point guard, but also bring in another vet. I know there's been the rumblings of CP3, Westbrook, maybe not even those guys, but another backup point guard that's similar, like Colin Gillespie, to share those backcourt minutes alongside each other, I think would be the best, because like you mentioned, in those minutes that he played with Budenholzer, it wasn't like it was guaranteed all the time, because he played like 13 one night, then he'd play 5, then he'd be in the starting lineup. It was just all wishy-washy with him, and that's tough for him to develop, but also to figure out what he can actually be for the Suns, and for the front office to kind of figure out what his central role is. So I think bringing in another one of those point guards to supplement that, so that when Devin Booker goes to the shooting guard position and they bring Colin Gillespie in as that backup point guard, it's not all reliant on him. There's someone to else at least share that volume with, and kind of at least make it a little bit easier for him to get more comfortable in that role. And then maybe at the second half of the year, if they are doing good, maybe they trade that veteran point guard and bump Colin Gillespie a little bit up for the second half of the season if they aren't going to make the playoffs. But like you said, I think that's kind of the pathway that they should go.
I think that all would be ideal. The one concern with all of that, and I think why you're saying they should try to add one more guy in that mold, is, as much as you can like Colin Gillespie, he probably would be, in a perfect world, a better fit on a team that did have a little bit more of that playmaking, which is, again, why I thought it was so crazy that Denver would get rid of him. I mean, between Gordon and Jokic and Murray, like, that's perfect. This Suns roster, they have other guys, him playing next to Jalen Green, him playing next to Devin Booker, him playing next to Grayson Allen. It's not a nightmare, and this team isn't trying to win a championship, so you can, take some warts with the fit here and there. But, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for him, I would say, too, to stick in the right ways, adjust his style, probably possession to possession based on who he's out there with. So it's going to be a fun subplot for the season for sure, now that we're pretty confident he's going to be playing.
Yeah, and he obviously had that shutout because the Suns can't really post about anyone else. They can only really post about him, Mark Williams, a little bit about Nigel Hayes-Davis. So it's been mainly Colin on there, and I think it's kind of funny. Personally, someone that went to Seton Hall and saw Colin play at Villanova 8 times in college, I could say that I was on the odd side of Colin at the beginning, because he would just torch Seton Hall with, Sadiq Bey, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Brandon Slater, all those guys. But now, obviously, that he's doing it to the other opponent team, I'm obviously on the good side, kind of rooting for him. Now, the next guy I want to talk about that was another free agent is Nigel Hayes-Davis. When the news dropped, I was in a spaces with John Voita, and I let him know that the Celtics were a team that were interested in Nigel Hayes-Davis, not only into this offseason, but back into 2021 when he was looking for a comeback. He obviously has some familiarity with a former Phoenix Sun in Frank Kaminsky. They played at the University of Wisconsin together with Sam Decker, another former NBA player. And I think it's very intriguing for a guy in Nigel Hayes-Davis to kind of be coming over. I know a lot of people are comparing it to the Gershon Yabusele transfer over. I don't know if it's that high of a level where he's going to make that much of an impact to where he did on Philly, but I do think it's a similar instance where it's a flyer that you're taking on and a guy that has bounced out of the NBA but has risen in Europe and is looking for that kind of reculmination back into the NBA. So with Nigel Hayes-Davis, what is your main takeaways with him?
Well, so I think the Yabusele thing is a good kind of thing to bounce off of with him because, like, what were the differences, right? Why is it not the same? I think one, Yabusele had the Olympics to go off of, where he was competing against the best talent in the world, and you were able to confidently look at how he performed and, surpassed Rudy Gobert, on top of just playing well in that rotation over the course of that tournament. And that just made it easier to imagine. But the other thing that made it easy to imagine with him is his role over there was very similar to what you would think his role is going to be in the NBA, and ultimately what it ended up being when he came over this past season for Philly, even though their season went sideways. But with Hayes, he is going to have to adapt, right? Like, this is a guy who won Finals MVP. He's primary scorer, balls in his hands. He's posting up. He's driving from the perimeter. He's taking pull-up threes late in the clock. Like, he is the guy. And, of course, that's not – I'm not going to put a cap on the dude, but that's not what I would expect him to be in the NBA now that he's back. So the question for me is, I know it sounds maybe similar to what I was just saying about Gillespie, but it's like, what do the Suns want him to do out there? Because, you mentioned the Celtics were interested all the way back in 2021. There was some reports last summer that the Suns were interested too. And so I'm curious what they've envisioned him being for them, because they clearly are all in on this idea, kind of bringing back the like mid 2010s type of four, right? Mm-hmm. Like, basically we're now 10 years past when those guys kind of started to get phased out, when Bosh went to the 5 and Draymond went to the 5. They all kind of, the actual players back then, of course, are out of the league, but that archetype, all the training staffs and coaching staffs around the country and the world were like, okay, you all have to learn how to shoot or you're not going to be in the biggest league in the world and make millions of dollars. And they all just kind of learned how to shoot. And you're kind of seeing that come back into vogue now, where we saw the Suns, of course, get Rasheer Fleming, who could fit that mold. Even the guy that they signed made it official today with their two-way contract, CJ Huntley, who went to App State. And now Nigel Hayes, who's a little shorter than those two guys, but I think that, to me, is what I would imagine that they think of him as potentially being, like that Jeff Green, Kenyon Martin, Serge Ibaka, like whatever you want to kind of put in there, but with a jump shot. And I like it. I think it is kind of how the league is going when you look at Chet Holmgren and Pascal Siakam and Evan Mobley and the guys that have had success at the very top of the league lately. But can he do that, right? Like, can he be especially impactful enough on the defensive end to, I think, counteract what will still be some limitations on offense as a jump shooter you would expect in the NBA? And I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious what you think now that I've rambled about the role. Like, do you think he can create shots for himself coming back here? Do you think he'll just kind of be a spot-up play finishing type guy? Do you think he can guard bigger guys, or is it going to be more wings? Like, what do you think as far as his game goes? Because I'll admit, like, I haven't spent so much time digging in outside of just, let me check out his highlights when I see the news come down.
Yeah, so I would say I'm probably in the latter, probably a play finishing guy, probably spot up shooter type of guy. I don't know how well he's going to be able to create his own jump shot. Like you mentioned, him translating from being a EuroLeague MVP in Turkey and having the ball in his hands and being that main creator to coming over to the Suns. Who knows, is he going to be starting? Like, I don't even think that's kind of like concrete. That's still kind of up in the air, like what his like true real hole in this roster is really going to be. So when you put all that into play, similar to like a guy in Colin Gillespie, I feel like he's just going to be a player that's going to be used in the mold. But if you're signing Nigel Hayes-Davis and you're drafting Rasheer Fleming, like, you want to be using those types of guys, right? You want to experiment and show what that type of power forward role can be. And I like how you mentioned how he's a very similar type to Fleming, because I think the Suns are kind of getting this little like mentorship kind of program going where they're getting guys that play similar roles, but also getting like a younger prototype in that, like Nigel Hayes-Davis and Rasheer Fleming, Kamen Malawach and Mark Williams both going to Duke and having that connection. And then you obviously have Kobe Bryant now with Devin Booker, like, not necessarily like getting replacements, right? But getting guys that play very similar to how their actual star players or guys that they want to mold are actually developing into, and just having those as secondary options just in case one of those guys gets injured, or one of those guys isn't available, doesn't pan out to be, not really with Bray and Booker, but with the other two situations. It's a little bit easier to kind of fill that in and maybe have the Suns, not take too much of a step back if those injuries do come into play. But with Rasheer Fleming and Nigel Hayes-Davis, like you mentioned, I think he'll probably be, in my eyes, would be like a bench kind of guy. I see him kind of being like that 8th, 9th man for this Suns rotation team. But once again, I still don't know who's starting at power forward, so that could ultimately change as well.
I would even say Dunn could probably benefit from, I always am hesitant on like, oh, this guy's just going to teach that guy. And I know that's not what you're saying either. It's about, too, from a coaching staff standpoint, building a team where there's similarities top to bottom. And that's for sure. And I think Dunn, it fits in there. But I don't know. I think it's a cool thing to throw in the mix kind of from a culture standpoint, too. Just a guy like this that did have to kind of go around the world and back, change how he approached the game, get a lot better, and now is coming in here. Maybe that means he's a little, intense about pushing for, like you're saying, a starting job and some of those things. But hey, I don't hate that. So maybe he makes Dylan Brooks somebody you could offload. I think he's a real wild card here for all those reasons, where you could tell me he's a fringe starting caliber player already because he is 30. He has a ton of experience under his belt and he's been dominating. Or you could tell me, yeah, he just plays 12 minutes, but he's valuable in that role, and they keep him for a few years on, minimum or close to minimum contracts, and that's kind of it. Either way, I think it's a great thing to try out for the minimum.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for a team like the Suns, where you're in the second apron, right, and you have to take these flyers out on these players and ones that maybe might be a little bit of a risk, having the, I guess, backing up of the knowledge of knowing that the Suns were interested in him last year, knowing that other teams around the league were also interested in a guy in Nigel Hayes-Davis, I think makes you feel at least a little bit more confident, at least with the signing.
It's exactly what we've been kind of, I think, begging for the Suns to do, right, where they've never really been heavy on overseas guys since James Jones took over. They don't really take these kinds of flyers, even G Leaguers or undrafted free agents. They just always left meat on the bone, and I can just respect that they're exhausting all their resources, because if they, I think we're about to get to the Beal stuff maybe.
Yep.
If they stretch a dude and have $23 million of dead money for 5 years, you gotta find the Nigel Hayeses in whatever country they happen to be in and hit on them. Otherwise, you're screwed.
Oh, 100%. And I think kind of comparing that, and this will be my last thing on Nigel Hayes-Davis, when you compare the team 2 years ago when they just got Bradley Beal and you saw those veteran minimum guys they were signing, right? And they weren't really taking those risks. It was those older batch veterans that weren't really going to work out, like the Drew Eubanks, the Yuta Watanabes. Unfortunately for those guys, just wasn't going to pan out. When seeing a guy like Nigel Hayes-Davis, I think it makes you at least, a little bit more interested and bought into what the team is definitely doing. And now we can talk about the elephant in the room, Bradley Beal, the guy who, still dealing with the quarrels with the Phoenix Suns. There was a report came out today from Dwayne Rankin saying that the Suns are looking to getting a buyout done with Bradley Beal, or engaging in those talks at this moment. The Suns obviously are still trying to shed some salary because they're in the second apron. Now, could they do that by trading Grayson or trading Royce or trading off Richards and then having some more flexibility for Beal with more contracts in and stuff like that to take on two or three bad ones for Beal? I do think so, but ultimately, if that's not the option that presents themselves, they might just go and buy out or stretch Beal out the way, so then they can drop below that second apron, be in the first, have that non-tax mid-level, maybe offer it to Chris Paul, maybe offer it to another player, and fully able to really rework this roster. So I'll just get out the room. obviously there's the people that say waive him, the people that say trade him, the people that say keep him. What's your main thoughts with all of this, Brendon?
Well, I think at this point where I'm at, just my personal opinion is to just keep him. Keep him and basically say, if you're not going to play ball, then you're not going to have much of a role here. And over the course, by the end of the season, you may not have a role at all. And, basically play a little bit of hardball with him. Although I don't know even how insulted he would be by that, frankly. I mean, he obviously didn't take too well to being benched last season, but to me, that was more about the subterfuge, if you want to call it that, of the Jimmy Butler stuff and trying to kind of force him to say yes to something he didn't want to do. But if he wants to stay here this year, then he can't really be upset about what his role is. So, that's kind of how I have seen it up until today, where that new report came out. And I would say with Dwayne's piece, my main question coming off of that is how new is this information, right? Because at face value, the idea that the Suns would be considering waiving and stretching Brad, that's not, of course they are, right? But what does it mean? Does that mean they've, Mark Bartelstein's been in Phoenix the past few days and they're meeting about it and getting close and Brad's on board and it's, there's some momentum here? Or does it just mean, hey, we're considering it, it's one of many options, etc.? And I guess off of that, the next layer of the reaction that I had was, does this mean there are teams that have expressed interest in giving Brad the contract that he would need in order to be bought out, which we know is roughly, let's just call it the mid-level exception because nobody has cap space. And not only that, but for his sake and to make the math work as best as possible over, I think it's at least 3 seasons. So, are we at that point? Is there some team that has whispered behind the scenes through his reps, hey, we would sign you to that type of contract if you were to become available? I don't know. Did it get accelerated because Damian Lillard's also exploring some kind of thing like that too now? I don't know. Those are all the thoughts rattling around my head, but frankly, man, I'm a little skeptical that anything has really changed until we see this is close to happening. I kind of just think he's going to be on this roster because it's such a long shot to make anything happen here.
Yeah, you mentioned also, even for the Suns to get the stretch and waive done, right? Because they 15%, they can't even fully buy out and stretch his contract, so they have to have him take that discount. And I believe the most friendly one is $80 million, but I think automatically he has to leave 13 on the table regardless for the Suns. So that's roughly what around the MLE is, 13.7, around 14.1. So he could be getting that, and depending on if it's multiple years, I don't know how really that would affect him as well. Maybe shedding a little bit more money for the Suns as well if he can get a 2 or 3 year contract instead of a 1. But like you mentioned, I think for the Suns it's just very difficult. I would love to see him be gone. I just don't know, like you mentioned, if it's going to be possible because of all the salary stuff. And to trade Beal too, if you're going to trade him, because they're in the second apron now, they can't. There's no team that has the $50 million that can take on his contract. So if you're going to trade him, it's easier to be in the first apron, because then potentially you can take more salary in return, right? Even if you do take a $40 million and a $20 million contract from 2 different teams, at least you're getting off the no trade clause of Bradley Beal. And if you're stuck to a Jeremy Grant contract or a Marcus Smart expiring or something like that, maybe there's a little bit more optimism for you to kind of feel all right, at least we're off one of these deals. We're not really stretched and tied to this. But with the fans obviously seeing $16 million tied to 3, potentially even 5 years, if it is stretched and wave over that 5-year period, that's going to be very difficult for the Suns to not only restructure their roster for this season, but also for future seasons in trades and stuff like that. Because what happens if there's a guy that they want but they can't get him because they have this $16 million payment that they have to send out? That's just going to completely hinder stuff, similar to how we already had hindrances with Beal trying to trade Beal for Butler. We might be having hindrances with Beal's contract post Bradley Beal being out of Phoenix as well.
Exactly. And I think, I don't, the reaction or the coverage of the Lillard thing shouldn't impact what the Suns do. But what I think it does put into perspective when you really see a team do it is just how think about it from this standpoint, right? Like we're talking about Devin Booker and this extension as well, which I think is 3 days away from him being eligible for it. Let's fast forward to the year when that would kick in and he's making $75 million. I think that is 3 seasons from now. This stretch would still be on the books, right? So you're talking about, whatever the cap is, it's obviously going to be much higher by then, but that's upwards of $90 million dedicated to just Devin Booker and the memory of Bradley Beal. That's insane. For all the conversation that we have right now about teams that are like, the Denver deal, although Cam Johnson's a good player, that was financially motivated, or what Boston has been doing, or, on down the line, you're just so far at a disadvantage in this world of this new CBA that you can't do it without a plan. And that's where I think, setting aside whatever it would look like in terms of how you communicate it with Brad or what his role is and everything, I just don't see the hurry in a season where they're already not going to be competitive to bite that bullet. If Kevin Durant was still here and they came off of a second round or third round appearance last season and then they were trying to get better, then yeah, I could understand like Milwaukee why you would try to pull something crazy like that. But when you're saying how good can Common Malawach develop over the course of a season, and let's see what Colin Gillespie can do with a bigger role, and those are the conversations, why would you hamstring yourself like that? I really don't get it. So that's why I keep assuming that it's just not gonna happen. One thing I'll say though, if the Bartelstein connection is so great, this is the time for Josh to make his money here. Get some nice, maybe get a couple whiskeys in your dad or some, whatever it takes. Get this thing favorable to the Suns. Make it happen, Josh. Otherwise, I don't care what your last name is, and it never mattered.
No, I agree with you. And similar to the Bucks comparison with the Dame buyout, I think obviously they had that plan, like you mentioned, bringing in Miles Turner, and they're in a different situation because even though they are struggling and still don't have draft assets like the Suns in the East, they're worried about their star leaving. The Suns aren't worried about their star leaving. They know Devin Booker wants to stay. Matt Ishbia has confirmed he wants him to stay. They know that they're going to sign that extension. So I would agree with you, kind of moving off this Bradley Beal contract and strapping yourself to $90 million, even if the salary cap is rising 7%, 10% every single season, and that $16 million isn't going to look as detrimental in 2 or 3 seasons down the line. It's still going to be a hindrance, similar to how Nazir Little and EJ Liddell's wave and stretches from last year were a hindrance this season. And even though it's only $3 million, that still holds up the Suns, still takes them into the second apron, still has them have them shed more salary down the line. So then, before we sign off, Brendon, I have one last question for you, not revolving around Beal, but revolving around Grayson, Royce, and Nick Richards, because the Suns could ultimately shed them as well, right? And maybe not for just draft capital, but potential expiring contracts, trading. I saw someone tweet out maybe a Grayson Allen for Matisse Thybulle just to get the expiring, save $6 million, get off of that money, have some more flexibility for the next season, stuff like that, be able to make more trades in the season, be able to aggregate those salaries. What are your kind of thoughts on trying to move off of those 3 guys?
So Nick Richards, to me, I just don't see the point. Personally, I understand. Okay, Mark Williams is injury prone. You're talking about a rookie center with Malawach, but Oso Ighodaro is still on this team. If you're imagining a world where both of your centers are hurt, that portion of the season's already screwed anyway. You can't plan to go 3 deep at a position. That starts to be a little goofy. So I just don't think the insurance is necessary, and I would rather just, if I'm the Suns, take some, potential second round picks or whatever it ends up looking like back for him, especially with one thing you can definitely say about this front office is they are effective using second round picks as, stock market investments. They're wheeling and dealing with that stuff and somehow conjuring players out of thin air every year in the second round. So that would be valuable for them. as far as the other two guys, like, I just think the more that we've kind of watched the offseason play out, Allen in particular, I don't think the Suns are getting anything back for him. As unfortunate as that is, it's some of it's just timing. They signed him at the peak of his value. Then he had a come down season at the very least. I don't think he was terrible yet last year, but he definitely wasn't as good as the year prior, especially when it comes to defense and playmaking. And he has, what is it, like $50-something million left on his contract. If you look at the Terrence Mann deal that happened earlier in the offseason, which I know you're familiar with, it's obviously no one would call it the Terrence Mann trade. It was the Kristaps Porzingis trade. But for the Suns' perspective, it kind of is the Terrence Mann deal because he had 3 years and $47 million left on his deal. And the cost to get off of that money from Atlanta's standpoint was a first-round pick. And so you're talking about, I know that they got Porzingis and it's not a one-to-one, but if you kind of use that as the rough ballpark with this thing, you would say either a better first-round pick or more than a first-round pick would cost the Suns to get off of Grayson Allen. Because I would say Grayson's a slightly better player than Terrence Mann, but I don't think it's drastic because their skill sets are different. But overall, 30-year-old guy, mostly just a shooter. Terrence Mann, not quite 30, limited on offense, but a good point of attack defender, can rebound, play bigger than he is, handle the ball a little. Like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's a lot to lay out, but that's my thinking on him. Is I just think it's not worth trying to explore that road because I don't think the Suns are going to like what they hear, and they probably already have explored it and probably already didn't like what they heard. Now, Royce, to me, I would say, is much more interesting because I don't think there's a great role for him on this team right now. I think that Brooks and Hayes Davis and Dunn and, Fleming, whatever, like all Jalen Green, like all the wing heavy kind of jokes we've been making, like, well, okay, then Royce O'Neal is going to maybe be the odd man out there. Or if he does play, he's coming at the expense of those other guys who I would just rather see get development minutes. And his contract is, of course, lower. So you're talking about, what is it, like 32, 33 million? That's significantly less than that Mann deal. And that starts to get into the range where maybe I would actually attach some second-round picks to him if it meant getting under the second apron and just not getting anything back for him, dumping the money, and having some flexibility. I could see that type of trade being out there for the Suns as the offseason goes on and somebody says, hey, well, Royce O'Neal could probably help us, and we're going to get some picks out of it. If we're a rebuilding team that needs some wing depth, why not? Like, I could see Charlotte playing him the way that the style that they play basketball, right? Like, I think that there will be some opportunities there, and the Suns love trading with the Hornets. So I think Roy, yeah, right? Like, they already have the Charlotte GM on speed dial. Might as well see. But I think there could be other teams too. So that would be definitely one to watch as the offseason continues, restricted free agency dries up, and teams start to really look at, okay, how are our books going to be come April, and what can we do? And I think maybe toward training camp, the Suns could maybe make something happen.
Yeah, I would still keep my eyes out on for trades. Like you mentioned, I don't think the Suns feel confident running the Hornets back or Hornets front court from last year in Phoenix now. Like, that just doesn't seem sense having both Richards and Mark Williams. So I do agree. I think that they'll look to try to do a trade. Maybe once that free agency center market does fizzle out. We've already seen DeAndre Ayton now go, but with maybe the likes of Al Horford and some of those names getting taken off, maybe a guy like Nick Richards will be a little bit more valuable and for those second round picks. And like you mentioned, maybe they could attach those to a guy like Royce to get off his contract, because I don't think that he really has a role at that power forward position. Like you mentioned, Dunn, Brooks, Nigel Hayes Davis, maybe even Rasheer Fleming, those guys all competing. And like we just discussed, how we want to see Nigel Hayes Davis and Rasheer Fleming kind of this season if they're going to be brought into the system. If you did draft them, if you did trade for them, that would be a little bit more exciting for Suns fans. So maybe Royce kind of being the odd man out there kind of does stick. And then revolving around Grayson Allen, I was writing articles for Brightside trying to trade him, but like you just mentioned, I think his value now does seem untradeable. I talked to John about it before, like in the middle of the season. He was saying, I don't really know about Grayson. It might be a little bit tough. And then obviously now we're getting kind of into the middle of the offseason, and you see even a guy like Duncan Robinson, who went on a cheaper contract than Grayson Allen to the Pistons and came back for Simon Fontecchio. Like, if that's what you're really getting up, if you're the Phoenix Suns, is it really worth just moving off the salary or potentially just trying to work something out? Or could you hold on to a guy like Grayson Allen who maybe, who knows, in this offseason could look pretty solid and boost his trade stock at the deadline if you are a taken team?
They need that shooting, right?
Yeah.
Like we were just talking about, they didn't get a spacing center. Some of these guys, the jump shots are iffy. I think you could do a lot worse than just having a really, really elite floor spacer out there as these guys develop and kind of figure it out next summer. I don't think that's a bad plan at all.
Yeah, I would definitely not disagree with you at all. But Brendon, I want to say thank you so much for hopping on for Suns Digest today and talking for us for the afternoon. I will give you the credit to let you know that there were over 140 people in the stream today, which you are the #1 viewer here. So thank you so much for joining us once again. You guys are seeing Brendon on here. You probably already know him for his staff writing that does for Awful, announcing all on Locked On Suns, as well as a credential media member. But definitely check him out. And once again, thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we can have some more Suns discussions soon in the future.
Yeah, man, you do great work over here. You know your stuff, and it was great talking to you. I'm happy to join on anytime.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for tuning in here as well in the chat. We appreciate all of you guys. They're giving you your today signal over on the chat, Brendon, hitting you with your own sign.
There we go.
Over here on Suns Digest. But once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, hanging out here with Brendon and I, breaking down the Suns. You guys are absolutely fantastic, and we'll be live once again next week with another guest going over the Suns offseason. Hopefully, Bradley Beal news will come through by then. Maybe another thing revolving around the Suns, but if not, definitely stay tuned. Without further ado, guys, we'll catch you later. Have a great rest of your night, and peace out, everyone.